Hi folks, and welcome to another episode in a video series presented and funded by KupoCon, where I'll be exploring the Final Fantasy VII compilation lore and Easter eggs that appear in the remake. I'm MJ Gallagher, author of The Nibelheim Incident, an award-winning novel and audiobook also produced by KupoCon, as well as my latest release, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII. The purpose of this series is to discuss a lot of the detail hidden within Remake, and to provide a broader understanding for new and veteran fans alike. In the last episode, I examined the Cosmos Theatre visual display section of Chapter 16, The Belly of the Beast, tackling topics such as the history of the Cetra, Genova's arrival on the planet, the origins of the summons, and more. This time around, I'll continue breaking down the chapter and the player character's ascent through Shinra headquarters. The video will inherently include spoilers for this part of the game, but anything beyond Chapter 16 is minimal and mainly speculation. As always, if you're not familiar with the original Final Fantasy VII, there will very likely be heavy spoilers, and if you're new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. When Cloud, Tifa and Barret attempt to leave the visual entertainment hall, they discover an older man in a white dinner jacket blocking their path. The man openly presumes them to be Avalanche and introduces himself as Heart, deputy to Domino, the mayor of Midgar, and we met the pair back in the old game. The story behind Domino and Heart is actually one of my favourite pieces of trivia in the entire compilation. Since the original title, there has been a running theme of referring to Midgar as a rotting pizza, given the shape and division of the city's sectors. Heart's name in the Japanese version of Final Fantasy VII is Hut, which was supposed to be a joke. The idea was to reference the two biggest American pizza chains in the 1990s, Domino's and Pizza Hut. Anyway, Hart instructs the group to follow him and leads them to the corporate archives of the 62nd floor, where the office of Mayor Domino is located. Stepping into the room, they immediately realise that they have been caught several times by the building's security cameras. Domino reveals it has been him cleaning up after them, manipulating the system to prevent their presence raising any alarms. He is surprised to learn their Avalanche cell wasn't already aware that he is the organisation's mole inside Shinra. Well, one of them. And historically, he is nowhere near the highest ranking official to secretly be in league with Avalanche. One of the main plot points in Before Crisis, a mobile game released exclusively in Japan in the mid-noughties, is that the person funding and controlling the militant wing of Avalanche is none other than Vice President Rufus Shinra. The Turks eventually uncover the truth, and Rufus is detained within their department. Towards the climax of the game, Rufus is able to hack into security feeds across Midgar to monitor the activities of invading Avalanche troops, as well as Shinra personnel. He makes a deal with the Turks to help them save their former chief, Verdot, because he can direct them to where Verdot is due to be executed in secret. Domino's actions here are likely both a callback to this, and a way to explain how Avalanche, and by extension Biggs and Jesse, got access to the Mako reactor security codes in Chapter 1. The mayor gets confused when Tifa tells him they intend to break into Professor Hojo's lab to save Aerith, because he's under the impression they are part of a plan to give President Shinra his comeuppance. This is another reference to Barret's Avalanche cell being out of the loop, as we'll discover in Chapter 17. For context, the player learns early in Remake that Barret's faction was excommunicated from Avalanche HQ and the wider network of cells approximately a year ago due to their extremist ideologies. Passing comments made by Jesse in chapters 1, 3 and 4 collectively suggest their group continued to share information and supplies with Avalanche HQ, but this came to an end after the bombing of Mako Reactor 1. The raid on the Shinra warehouse and unexpectedly crossing paths with a militant branch of Avalanche in Chapter 4 are a result of the latter. Furthermore, Mayor Domino's involvement in Avalanche HQ's plans can be spotted during episode Intermission, the PlayStation 5 DLC featuring Yuffie Kisaragi. If the player investigates the large whiteboard at Avalanche HQ's basement hideout in the Sector 7 slums, they'll see hand-drawn blueprints of the Shinra building's lobby, as well as the corporate archives and recreational facility at the top right of the board. The latter is a nod to the presence of another Avalanche collaborator. As for Domino working with Avalanche HQ in Remake, this is obviously a change, but not a contradiction to the old game. In fact, although he encourages the group to hurt Shinra during the original's corresponding scene, when the player first visits the Sector 5 slums, a TV news report states the mayor has publicly condemned the bombing of Mako Reactor 5. On the topic of the Avalanche collaborator, Domino directs Cloud, Tifa and Barrett to head to the recreational facility on the 63rd floor and identify themselves to the man. He says the countersign to the mayor that the collaborator should give is the best. Fans of the original Final Fantasy VII will no doubt have immediately recognised the relevance of this. When the party meets Domino in the old game, he makes them guess a password in order to obtain his keycard. The answer is one of 6 words randomly selected each playthrough. These are best, king, orbs, bomb, Mako and Hojo. Interestingly, further reference is made to this if you approach the robots dotted around the library. They will each offer a vague countersign, but the sentences contain words like best, Mako and explosion, which is presumably a replacement for bomb. If you speak with Deputy Hart outside the office, he tells the group that he is willing to provide clues to the identity of the Avalanche collaborator, but only at a price. This is another callback to the old Final Fantasy VII, where the player can pay Hart either 500, 1000 or 2000 gil to get a small hint at what Domino's password is. As for the archives themselves, the location is visually attractive, but they are responsible for one of my biggest petty gripes in Remake. Despite the thousands of books on the shelves, and the dedicated reading area at the centre of it all, itself laying out like Midgar's sectors, there is no option to check out the titles. This is the company's executive archive, remember? Just imagine the Easter eggs that could have been hidden in here. The equivalent floor in the old game has smaller libraries that can be entered, separated by business division. It's also possible to read some of the titles of the books and reports there, and there are more than a few interesting ones, such as Mako Energy and the Rise in Life Forms, which is a reference to how Mako causes monster mutations, Problems with Plate Construction in Midgar, which likely alludes to the Sector 6 plate collapse, Modern History of the Shinra Space Program Volume 2, which indicates space travel has been on the company's agenda for a long time, or Materia Production and its military uses, which effectively lays the foundations for the materia fusion system in Crisis Core. As the party makes their way to the recreational facility, the player is treated to a captivating yet haunting scene with Hojo and Aerith. The scientist reveals he has no interest in pursuing the Promised Land, and is simply humouring the company so that he may be left to his own research. Hojo is easily one of the darkest villains in the entire Final Fantasy series, but the depth of his character is often overlooked by fans. As immoral as he typically is, there are things he cares about deeply. The tests he conducted on Aerith's mother Ifalna, the last pure-blooded ancient, were one of them. Hojo is being sincere when he says that he still regrets Ifalna fleeing his laboratory instead of trusting him. As I've spoken about in earlier episodes, we've known since the original Final Fantasy VII that Ifalna died following her escape from the Shinra building with Aerith 15 years ago. The details of this were extremely vague until the release of Kazushige Nojima's recent novel Traces of Two Pasts. Aerith's half of the book explains that Ifalna had been held captive by Shinra for almost the entirety of her daughter's life. Hojo ran daily experiments on Ifalna, presumably under instruction to extract the location of the Promised Land. At the age of 7, Aerith's own certain abilities manifested, and she began to have visions of places around the world. Further detail on this appears in Nojima-san's short story, Picturing the Past, found in Remake's World Preview book. Believing that he no longer had to take as much care with Ifalna because Aerith's abilities could be used as a backup, Hojo began performing more rigorous experiments. He drove Ifalna's mind and body to the brink, making her determined to escape. In short, Hojo knows he is responsible for Ifalna's death, but his regret is not the loss of the person, it is the loss of the scientific goldmine she was. This is verified in the next part of the cutscene, though the manner of it is pretty disturbing. Hojo taunts Aerith about how his scientists recovered Ifalna's body from the slums, then dissected and examined every last bit of this precious specimen, which is, incidentally, the same term he uses for Red 13 in the old game. While such cruelty is not beyond him as a character, I personally believe Hojo is testing Aerith here. The last time he saw the girl, she was capable of entering a trance-like state where she had visions of what was believed to be Mako hotspots. Hojo may therefore be deliberately attempting to cause a stress reaction in this scene in order to trigger one such vision. The party makes contact with the Avalanche collaborator next to the combat simulator of the recreational facility. He agrees to give the group another keycard, but only if they can prove their strength in the simulator. I spoke about these virtual training areas in the last episode, and how they featured prominently in Crisis Core and the online multiplayer mode of Dirge of Cerberus. It's interesting to know that Shinra has made them available to non-military personnel as well, but that might just be a way of gathering low-level combat data. As if to reaffirm this, Chadley appears once the group has satisfied the corroborator's needs, wearing a lab jacket. The purpose behind the updated aesthetic may not have been obvious to some fans, but Chadley does introduce himself way back in Chapter 3 as being an intern for the company's research and development division, the department run by Professor Hojo. The importance of this is reintroduced in the post-game content, but I'll come back to that in a future video. Heading for the ground floor of the canteen, Cloud pauses when he sees two security officers climbing the steps towards him. One recognises the blonde swordsman, claiming that they went through training together. He goes on to say that some of his colleagues had heard Cloud got smoked, but he hadn't believed it, then asks Cloud to sit tight while he goes to get Kunsel. Cloud is visibly affected by the encounter, and for good reason, because the implications of this scene are huge. Kunsel is a second-class soldier from Crisis Core who plays the role of keeping Zack informed about the goings-on in the department, but is also a good friend. In fact, the secret section of the initial remake Ultimania says Kunsel is Zack's best friend in Crisis Core. He even checks in on Aerith while Zack is in Nibelheim. Anyway, during the latter section of that game, Zack wakes up in the Shinra Manor basement to discover 4 years have passed. He begins receiving emails from Kunsel, who does not believe the official company statement that Zack was killed in action during the Nibelheim tragedy. Kunsel later deduces that the fugitive ex-soldier the army is searching for must be his friend. So this is where it gets interesting. Kunsel repeatedly proves himself in Crisis Core to be a pretty resourceful guy, so it's highly probable he would have known who else was on the Nibelheim assignment and who the other escapee was. When the security officer tells Cloud he's going to get Kunsel, it's because Cloud's presence implies Zack may also have returned. From a timeline perspective, it has only been a few weeks since Zack was gunned down outside Midgar. As for the infantryman's comments about Cloud, the inference here is that both of them started in the security division, with Cloud being promoted to soldier. Veteran fans of the story may have appreciated just how crafty a misdirection this is. I also wonder if the specific translation in the English localisation of Cloud getting smoked is a reference to Nibelheim burning down. Having witnessed President Shinra and director Heidegger discussing Wutai's response to the company's false narrative regarding the enemy nation being co-conspirators in the destruction of Sector 7, the party pauses on the 64th floor to reiterate the advice they were given about finding the air ducts in the men's bathroom. Many of you will undoubtedly have recognised that this detour is lifted directly from the old game, but there are a couple of more subtle Easter eggs to be found. The first is chatting with the man by the vending machines. He will ask if the trio are private security or something, presumably based on their outfits and weapons. This is a likely callback to the original, where an employee of the 61st floor canteen, which the Remake's recreational facility is based on, gives the group a keycard because he thinks they are from the Shinra Repair Division, here to fix a door. As for the bathroom itself, there's a comment from co-director Motomu Toriyama in Remake's Material Ultimania, where he admits that the toilets were modelled on those of the Square Enix building in Tokyo. Cloud and Tifa access the air ducts from the bathroom and are able to listen into the Shinra executive meeting. They join at a moment where Palmer is insisting he saw Sephiroth, just as I discussed in the previous episode. This, of course, is a notable deviation from the old Final Fantasy VII, where Palmer does see Sephiroth, but only to witness him murdering the President. From there, the meeting plays out similarly to how it does in the original. It's worth briefly highlighting that there are only 5 company divisions represented at the assembly. Before Crisis repeatedly shows scenes where there are more directors around the table, as well as Vice President Rufus. Among them was Verdot, Chief of the Turks and Director of General Affairs. Director Lazard is also introduced in Crisis Core as head of the Department of Soldier. As it happens, command over both these divisions is later transferred to Heidegger, Director of Public Security, hence fewer numbers at the table. And finally, when the conversation turns to Professor Hojo, he reports his findings from the initial tests conducted on Aerith. Using President Shinra's desire to locate the Promised Land to his advantage, Hojo requests permission to adopt more forceful methods to get Aerith to cooperate, though he quickly clarifies that he intends to handle the girl with care. As I explained earlier in the episode, Traces of Two Pasts confirms it was forceful testing that eventually caused Ifalna's death 15 years ago. This point is not lost on the President, which is why he warns Hojo not to make the same mistake twice. It is here that Hojo proposes a way in which to mitigate the risks of pushing Aerith too hard. They could have her reproduce. A similar suggestion was made in the old game, where Hojo intended to have her mate with Red 13, whose species boasts extraordinarily long life. I suspect the amendment to the details is as much to do with the game's age rating as it is with the many questions we've all had over the years. The new proposal involves Aerith being forced to birth children with the blood of both ancients and soldiers. S and G-type soldiers to be exact, according to Hojo, as there's no predicting what sort of properties such offspring might possess. These few lines are a massive compilation Easter egg, primarily with respect to Crisis Core. First of all, purely from a biological perspective, while the idea of Aerith reproducing with a member of Soldier might make some fans uncomfortable, this would probably have been the eventual outcome with Zack if their relationship had continued. As for why the offspring of S-type and G-type soldiers might be different, that one requires a bit more explaining. Crisis Core introduced the concept that not all soldiers gain their supernatural strength from the same cocktail of Mako showers and Genova cells. In the early days of the Ancients project, whose purpose was to produce people with powers comparable to the Cetra, there were 3 children successfully born of Project Genova G and Project Genova S respectively. These babies were Genesis, Angeal and Sephiroth. Sephiroth was unique in that he was directly exposed to Genova cells while still in the womb. The other 2, however, were only exposed to a diluted variant of Genova cells, known as G cells, which had been extracted from Professor Jillian, a Shinra scientist who was previously injected with Genova cells. As Genesis, Angeal and Sephiroth grew, it was determined that the scientific methods used in their respective births had resulted in different genetic properties. Study of these properties continued after the establishment of Soldier, with candidates being divided into G-type and S-type soldiers, depending on whether they had been infused with G cells or S cells, which is another term for pure, undiluted Genova cells. G-type soldiers, not to be confused with the Sviets, who are described in Dirge of Cerberus' secret G reports as being the hellspawn of Genesis, boast some interesting characteristics, as evidenced in Crisis Core. For example, Angeal and Genesis are able to copy their likeness onto monsters and other combatants. These are the kinds of properties Hojo is referencing when he says it's impossible to predict what Aerith's offspring with a soldier might be like. A curious addition to this is that the benefits of using G cells are offset by physical degradation, a phenomenon unique to G-type soldiers. Genesis's own deterioration in Crisis Core is the driving force behind his villainy. I spoke about this way back in my Chapter 7 episode, because President Shinra remarks that the most common death in soldiers is accelerated cellular degradation, and Cloud's reaction suggests he will be affected by it too. However, the secret section of Remake's first Ultimania clarifies the matter, reaffirming that S-type soldiers are not affected by degradation. Those listed in this category include Sephiroth, Zack, and Cloud. Well everyone, this has been my recap of the compilation lore and Easter eggs from the 4th part of Chapter 16. I hope you enjoyed it, and please be sure to leave a comment with any feedback or something you think I've missed. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my Patreon account, where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim incident, and so much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, or mythology and Final Fantasy articles, etc. And please also consider picking up a copy of my book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which is now also available as an audiobook and special edition hardback. The links to each edition can be found on my Patreon, the address for which is noted at the end of this video. I would additionally like to thank KupoCon for commissioning the series and encourage all viewers to support their channel and brand. But until next time, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, and I'll speak to you again soon.